Hi everybody, I'm Amanda. I'm an education coordinator here at the Culture Center, and I was not here yesterday because Daniela Zaltzman, who's also here, and I were doing education things. So we were visiting. We did 5 school talks yesterday, and so we've got a panel for you on. We're going to cover a lot of things. We're going to cover pitching and reporting, how to shape a story, how to ask hard questions, how to use social media as you move through your projects. And so I guess what we'll do is I'll introduce the panelists to you, and then they're each going to do a short presentation. Sorry, my chair is spinning. I was going to stand up. They're each going to do like a 10-minute presentation of their work. And then we'll have a chance to ask questions and chat a bit. So on the far right, Mellissa Fung is award-winning journalist and former CBC correspondent. She's been on the front lines of a wide range of stories on both Canadian and world affairs for the last 20 years. She's covered the war in Afghanistan and produced the award-winning documentaries Canada's Ugly Secret and No Country for Horses. She received the prestigious Gracie Award for her interview comparing notes for captivity. Her best-selling first book, Under an Afghan's Guide, chronicles her experience as a hostage after she was kidnapped while on assignment in Afghanistan in 2008. In 2013, Fung returned to Afghanistan to report on the continuing challenges that exist there for women and girls. In addition to the CBC, her work has appeared in The Walrus, The Toronto Star, Global Post, and PBS, among other publications. She's been featured as a keynote speaker for organizations as diverse as the Women for Women in Afghanistan, the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, and the American Bar Association. She works here in Washington. In the middle, we have Melissa Turley. She reported from South Africa as the 2012 Pulitzer Center Campus Consortium International Reporting Student Fellow from the George Washington University. Melissa now works as a member of Secretary Kerry's press team, traveling around the world with the State Department Press Corps and coordinating both their logistics and the Secretary's public diplomacy events. Molly Roberts, on the left here, is a Washington, D.C.-based award-winning photography editor, consultant, and photographer, and chief photo editor at Smithsonian Magazine. With 25 years in the magazine and book publishing world, she's contributed to the look and content of award-winning publications, including the Washington Post Magazine, USA Weekend, and Smithsonian Magazine. She's also photographed for National Geographic Books, Forbes, ASAP, Ms. Magazine, and others. Okay. All right. So Molly is actually going to present her work first, and I'll turn it over to her.
It's a pleasure to be here. Does such great work, and I'm excited to be it's the emerging photographers and reporters.
Would you put the mic closer?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, because the Google. I might have. Right. You know, I'm a representative of, you know, I guess you would say, old media, and I would say that everybody would be representative of new media. The old media people are very excited to have you all join us in, you know, redefining and, you know, where we're going. And so, please jump right in. About what journalism so I'm going to talk about, as a picture editor, what I kind of look for in work. Portfolio, so okay, so I think, you know, I read something different statistics, but one that I recently saw. So, how do you see that how do you understand that? Obviously, because of that, somebody who's come from the MR world, it is about images. So I think that importantly, one of the driving forces is your ideas. And you know, um, this is not a Smithsonian. And so the three things that we're going to talk about are access, ideas, and intimacy. Now this image is probably the last image of Neil Armstrong's space suit, just because it's going to be locked away in a locker room for preservation. So we were able to get into the museum warehouse. So I think access obviously is a really important attribute. In this case, in this Smithsonian, and it wasn't easy, we had to go to they had photographed it themselves, and they, had they felt that it was a fine photograph and that we could use it on the cover. But we basically treated the package of important things, important objects in the American history of the Smithsonian. So we wanted to have it. And then for instance, Stephanie Sinclair's project that she did for National Geographic. That was the first story that she did for National Geographic. And the reason that she did it was because she was the only one who had access to that video. So, that's the kind of thing that magazines and newspapers actually are looking for. Can you bring special access? Can you get them somewhere where they can't get themselves? So that's something to think about in the work that we're doing. Now, this project is called Weapons of the Fallen by Ashley Gibson. And I thought this was an interesting idea. This is a lot of ideas. I know Ashley is a conflict photographer and has been, and with the Afghanistan and Iraq war, he did not want to just do, cover war with that with the soldiers, do the stuff on the ground. It was important to him. He spent a lot of time thinking about how can I cover the impact of the war. And so that's why I'm saying ideas are I saw these images, I was really taken aback by the impact because it's the evidence of the soldiers. And in our busy pandemic world, sometimes the work that you're doing is very reactive, and it's important to take time to it's just, to slow touching. So this is it's interesting too to see the evolution of the work here because actually this is and he's now so first perhaps magazine newspaper stories, second maybe galleries as the project expands. And it's the same actually with this project. He was doing work on suburb, affluent suburbs of Montreal. And then he, on his way there, just kind of noticed these trucks that were leaders, workers, communities, community that. So he ended up doing a series of photographs of as well as yes. How do you tell the story that someone else has on? These are like catalogs, this is an idea also. This is actually our project. Called Touching Strangers. And obviously, this is not necessarily a journalistic approach where you ask, strangers to touch each other, and then you record. This is very tenacity. This is Tessera's work, which culminated in a book called Unsettled. And she photographed the gangs in LA and then also followed them back to El Salvador and spent 30 years on this project. I'm not saying, that you can do this full time, but, to have a project like that, is to have something that is an actually very serious piece of visual history that you created. And you are, you become an authority when you have that kind of tenacity with a project rather than, for instance, going to Libya for a week or going to Liberia for a week. I think that also photographers who I know find it sustainable for them to have something that they're not counting on getting an assignment for, but they're counting on that being something that is, very important to them. Because sometimes when you're just doing assignments, you're like, you're working for it, and not really. So to have your own business is something that really helps professional their control of their photographic destiny. This is also Mama's work. If you haven't seen the book inside it, this is body of work of this student. It's just coming out of the book this month. It was yesterday. Michelle, thank you. It's been on this topic for 6 or 7 years, and the basic thing is that, you know, working in obscurity on this kind of work that has finally kind of bubbled up into a crisis that everyone sees, so determined a lot of attention because it documents over a period of 6 years, migrants and refugees coming from Central America to the U.S. border. So here's a question of access too. I mean, how do you kind of end up on top of the train with these migrants? I know Michelle started out meeting people in the shelters that are I love this idea to be
I think it's good that Molly started because I'm just going to follow on her 3 things and show you how that can work when you're pursuing this story. First, ideas. Sometimes you'll come across something where you think that is way too incredible to be true. And the story that I'm going to talk about is one that I did in 2010. I read something, a report about Canada mining and exporting asbestos to developing countries. Something like they exported 500 million tons of it, which seemed to me to be ridiculous in 2010, when we are ripping asbestos out of the Parliament buildings and out of schools. We're still mining it in Quebec and sending it to poor countries. What's going on? I thought there's no way this can be true, right? It's absolutely ridiculous. But if true, what a story that would be. So I did a little more digging, helped the author of the report, and not only did I find out it was happening, but that the Canadian government was sponsoring it. They set up a lobbying group, or were giving $500,000 a year to a lobbying group called the Cristal Institute, based in Montreal. And this institute job was to go to these developing countries, India, Philippines, Indonesia, to promote the use of Canadian asbestos. Not only that, they were using Canadian embassies in these countries to hold cocktail parties for prospective clients. Anyway, we decided that we had to try to find a way to do the story. I mean, there was just, Canadians didn't know about it. We didn't know about it until we had read this obscure report. And so we pursued it, but nobody would talk. The Canadian government shut us down. The Cristal Institute shut us down. And we decided there was only one thing we could do, was go to one of these countries using our product. So we went to India. And there we finally found people who would talk. And they would talk because they'd been using our products for years and now they were dying and sick. And this was incredible to us, right, that this was happening in 2010. So what I will do is I'm going to show just a portion of the documentary. It ended up being a 20-minute documentary on our national newscast. I think it ran in, I'm going to say September 2010. I could be wrong about that. But before Anetta, you press play, I'm just going to set up the context. Now, we've seen everything. I've laid it all out, and nobody will talk to us. So what do you do when you're a journalist and nobody's responding? We had one side of the story, the sick and dying Indians in India. But the government refused to talk to us. The institute refused to talk to us. The mining company refused to talk to us. So you can still, the reason why I'm showing you this part is to show you that even if people refuse to talk to you, you can tell their side of the story. So I'll just press play if you can.
Just a hit on that to see if that works. Yes.
The organization that receives those tax dollars is called the Chrysotile Institute, named after the only kind of asbestos that's still mined anywhere in the world. It's supposed to educate people and the media on safe ways to handle asbestos, but its president, Clement Godbout, seen here a few years ago in a Radio-Canada documentary, would not return our calls. If he had, here's what we might have asked him. What exactly does the Chrysotile Institute do with the tax dollars it receives? We know it likely used some of it to launch a lawsuit against asbestos victims in France after they dared criticize the industry for their disease. They only recently dropped that lawsuit. And then there are those pseudo-scientific symposiums they hold to spread the good news about Chrysotile. Like this one they held in Indonesia in 2006. The asbestos industry's favorite researcher was there, but not a single scientist presenting peer-reviewed studies was invited or allowed to attend. The federal government was a prominent sponsor, holding a cocktail party for invitees.
Canada's diplomats and Canada's embassies have been used to wine and dine potential customers for Canadian asbestos. Our diplomatic corps are selling asbestos with morals lower than a used car salesman. They essentially shill for the industry. And what their role is to expand the market so Canada can export more asbestos. They really are merchants of death. It's as simple as that.
The industry and the Canadian government's position on selling asbestos to countries like India rests on one premise: that even though asbestos can cause cancer and other diseases, it is safe so long as proper safety precautions are taken. That's what brought us to India, to see if that's true. The power plant and the Ahmedabad cement factory are both big consumers of Canadian asbestos. And nobody called me back that I was in. Neither would allow us in. The signs outside the Eagle India textile factory did not look good. Piles of loose asbestos, waiting for a breeze to carry it through the neighboring slums. But the owner invited us in to have a look. He wouldn't agree to do an interview. He's still waiting for his operating permit from the government. Proud to be a good customer, he pointed out the bags of Canadian asbestos piled high inside. And printed on those bags a warning in English and French to avoid creating dust and to wear proper respirators when handling the product. But the workers wore no protective clothing at all. Some had only a bandana tied over their noses. It was in their hair, their clothes, and most certainly their lungs. In conditions like this, under Canadian safety regulations, nothing less than a full respirator with a separate air supply would protect these workers from the poisons in the air. Grim? Yes. Unusual? No, says Gopal Krishna.
Chrysotile asbestos, if it is safe, why is it not used in Canada? Why is it that the House of Commons gets decontaminated of chrysotile asbestos? Use it safely in Canada and then preach to the world that it can be safely used. This is height of hypocrisy, that you don't use it yourself and tell others to use it safely.
That's the kind of thing that will probably give you asbestosis 5 to 10 years from the onset of exposure. These countries, their infrastructure is being built out of something that's lethal. And these buildings they're putting up now are going to be around 100 years. And every time somebody has to do renovations on these buildings, they're going to be creating dust that could cause death and disease to people who do the work, to people who live in the buildings and work in the buildings.
The Ministry of Natural Resources is responsible for the industry. We tried a number of times to get an interview with the minister, Lisa Rafe, but she said no. Then we tried Public Works Minister Christian Parody, who's riding the remaining mines fallen. His press secretary stopped returning our calls. We thought we had an interview with the president of the last operating mine, Simon Duparet, but when we got to the mine's offices in Thetford, Quebec, he had changed his mind. So he's saying no. He doesn't want to be part of my story. I learned a lot about how to do this job doing that story. And a few quick lessons that I'll just tell you about before I pass the mic off to Mellissa. The first is I've already talked about it. Don't be afraid if nobody will talk to you. There's always going to be somebody who's willing to talk, tell their story. And, you know, our story ended up a bit one-sided, right? Because nobody was willing to give us the asbestos industry side of it. But that doesn't matter because, you know, in this case, pictures speak louder than words. Tenacity, which Molly mentioned, don't give up. That shot of the Eagle India factory, I mean, it looks like, I showed that, you know, we tried to get into a few other places. And we didn't have a lot of time. I mean, we were on the ground just for a week in Ahmedabad. And my fixer had a list, or I gave her a list of 50 factories that we knew were good customers of Canada's asbestos. That was Eagle India was like number 30 on that list. He had been turned away for 3 days by everybody. And I was slightly freaking out because, you know, we'd spent a lot of money to go there and we needed a shot of Canada's asbestos being used somewhere. So tenacity, don't give up. I mean, you know, it could have been number 50, right? It just happened that, you know, we passed it. So don't give up. Sensitive questions, which Ken was hoping that I would talk about as well. Don't be afraid to ask. The beginning of the documentary, which you didn't see, was full of people who were sick and died. Clearly had cancer. There was one guy who was told he had probably 6 weeks to live. And that was a very, very tough interview because he also was a language barrier. He didn't speak English, but he wanted to tell the story. And we had to spend quite a bit of time at the house because it was hard for him to talk. It was hard for him to tell the story because he couldn't talk, he didn't speak the language, and C, he was really, really sick. And we just spent the time just getting to know him before the camera rolled. So, you know, don't be afraid to spend the time to get to know somebody whose story you think is important to tell. I think that's really important. And I think the last thing is that you have to believe you can make a difference. Right, and the reason why I pursued this story so hard was I just thought this was wrong, that Canada should not be doing this. It made me ashamed in traveling in India. And for a long time, the day after the story ran on our national newscast, opposition members of parliament brought it up at question period in government the next day, and there was a heated debate. I thought, wow, maybe something can change. Well, nothing did because following spring, the government again gave the $500,000 grant to the Quest Institute. And this went on for 2 years. And so I got really, this lesson took me a few years to learn, got really depressed. Like we spent all this time and investment in this and we really felt it was gonna make a difference, but it's still happening. But then something interesting happened. Other news organizations decided to look at the story, and they did. So, the Globe and Mail started doing stories. The Toronto Star started doing stories. And just last year, or maybe it was the year, I want to say 2000, yeah, it was last year, the government decided not to subsidize the mining. So it took a good 4 years from when I started looking into this for legislation to actually, change, but it does. You can make a difference. Sometimes you don't see it right away, but if you really believe in your story, I think you can. So that I think is the most important lesson. If there's a story that you believe in, it needs to be told. So stick with it.
Yeah, I guess. Hi guys. So as Amanda said before, my name is Mellissa Fung. I was a 2012 fellow. So just like a lot of you guys, everyone in the room, I traveled to South Africa. And when I was originally looking at what story I wanted to pitch just to get my project in general, I started reading articles and as you all know, coming up with exactly how I wanted to pitch this. And so I was really interested in South Africa because at the time, there had been a lot of stories in the media about how successful South Africa was, how post-apartheid, they had this great story to tell that it was one of the new BRICS nations that was really becoming economically successful. And I remember reading an article in The Economist about this, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then the next day, reading a story in a different magazine about how awful women's rights and gay rights were there. So I thought, well, this is just a little odd. How can this storyline exist, or how can multiple storylines exist in the same place? So I originally started pitching my project as a study on gender rights and about how women's rights in South Africa weren't living up to the constitution that had been passed. And so when I got there, I first started focusing on this, and I had done a lot of research ahead of time, as you'll remember, making calls and trying to reach out to people, set up interviews. I was very nervous. I'd never done this before, obviously. And when I got there, I not only found that story, but I went to conferences and went to meetings and found that there was also a whole nother storyline about gay and lesbian rights that I hadn't really even thought about, and it seemed like that became my story. So I think my biggest takeaway from that was what you first think might be what you're focusing on isn't always what you have to go with. And so when I got there, I also found little, from talking to different women, different tracks of stories. So this woman, I ended up traveling to a rural part of South Africa. I met someone at a conference and they said, there's this story on land rights and women's rights that you have to go to. I can take you. And so I said, okay, sure. So we went. It was, I guess, the equivalent of if you're in DC going to like the Midwest. So we're way at that distance, at least, not. But we went out that far, and I started interviewing women, and a lot of women have been victims of gender-based violence, which was very prevalent. I found with everyone I spoke with, and it was something that was a sensitive topic that I had to really think about how to cover. I mean, number one thing, no one spoke English when I got there. It was a very rural area. I think I'd probably been the first person from the United States that I ever met in most cases. So I really had to think about when I'm there, how do I present myself? How do I ask the questions? What's appropriate to do? How are they going to react? And all this is through a translator. In a lot of cases, I think a lot of people use fixers and you can find give the same questions. So I think my takeaway from that in the beginning was I found out when I went into an interview or when I went into a situation, I set the tone. So when you're sitting down to an interview, I found if you're calm and if you're just very open to what they have to say, I thought it went so much better. And it was not easy at first. I found that by trial and error. When I would go in and you have all your questions and you want to get right to the point, you know exactly what you want to hear them say, but maybe they're not ready to say it. So from talking to this woman and with a lot of other women who lived in the same village as her, her translator eventually got there. And I found even by talking with the women one-on-one to start off and just establish a relationship, it was almost better too after talking to them to bring everyone together because they were more comfortable that way. It'd be the same as if I realized that obviously you're more comfortable talking with your friends about something when you can say like, oh, that happened to me too. And when we were sitting around the circle and talking with all of the women, a lot of them were saying kind of maybe that happened to me too. So that was the moment when I thought like maybe this is actually important. Maybe this is something that when I leave, hopefully it's something that establishes a little bit of a dialogue that didn't exist before. And so my first day, I landed in South Africa and I went to
this conference, which just happened to be at the same time. And this is when I first learned more about lesbian rights and women's rights in South Africa. And I found them talking to these women that in one of the townships where I visited, that it was a number, they had like 24 lesbians who had killed that year. And so they had set up a conference, and I found out just by going to this that they were willing to talk, they were willing to share their stories, but the same thing happened about how would I talk to them? Why would they want to tell me their stories? And so in this case, I think that they were a lot less eager in the beginning to share their stories, and I struggled with also on recording them. How do you do that? Is it, do you do a narrative? Do you write in their voice rather than my voice? Do I talk about my experience or about their experiences? And so in the end, after talking with Ken, my advisor, and with other people who've been helping with the project, I settled on doing slideshows, and instead of pictures that I had taken, because also I didn't know visually how to represent this project. And I had never had any experience with photography really other than my own personal photography. So I was coming up with a way to show this, because a lot of the women that I had spoken with were willing to tell their stories, but then other than taking a portrait of them, I didn't really know how to do that. And you struggle with, as was mentioned before, you have all of these new media options, but how do you pick and choose different social media or new media options that are appropriate and that work for your story? So I started there. Another takeaway I think I had from this was take every opportunity, because when I was there, it just happened to be Women's Rights Day. And so they had all of these festivals and celebrations, and people I had spoken with had told me to go. And that's where I met a lot of the contacts who then took me to other cities, other villages, in order to tell their story. This was one of the towns. I was really shocked. I'd never been to, actually, any part of Africa before. And this was the first time that I traveled around the villages. And I got a sense, my first couple of days, I really wanted to go in and just focus on the project. But then I started to take a step back and realize there's a much bigger picture here. That it's not, there's so many different things that went into my idea or what I wanted to focus on, that it wasn't just women's rights. It was, so why is it this way? Why has this post-apartheid government focused on, become focused on this issue? So I got to talk to people and talk about everything. Maybe it was someone that had nothing to do with this project, but they could talk about like what their life was before apartheid and what it's like after. And so that way it was kind of, you find your little tangents to figure out the bigger picture of South Africa in general. And I thought that was really helpful. This is the same town. And this just, I was shocked, it just went on for miles and miles and miles. And then I would say the hardest part of my project was I had also heard a lot about sex workers, and the whole legalization of sex work in South Africa was a really hot topic when I was there. So I went to an NGO that helps women and men who are sex workers get the support they needed, because a lot of times they're taken advantage of by the police. And I went to this facility and they were very willing to talk with me, but I wasn't necessarily prepared for how to talk with them or how to take their stories and take notes and ask the right questions. So I ended up going back a couple times because I felt like I hadn't really done enough research or been ready the first time. And I found from, this is Angie who I met, and she was one of the directors there. So I found out from talking to her and getting introduced to people there and going back and really being invested. And maybe the first time you didn't have all of your information, I went back home, went over my notes, went over my pictures, and thought, like, how can I tell this better now that I have these initial facts? So I felt that going back, and this was more towards the end, so by then I'd had a lot of experience with people, going back and really trying to get a deeper understanding. And overall, I think, and now I'm 2 years out, I'm on the other side now, still working at the State Department. I travel with the press corps, so you see John carrying the news wherever he goes, we go. So now I'm on the other side and handling sensitive topics in a different way. So we've been to a lot of places, from Kabul to Burma to West Bank to DRC, where we have to work with journalists on the ground in order to tell a story that's sensitive to them. So in the same way, we're looking at the same questions. How do you tell the story? How do you engage people? What social media do you use? How do you reach out? And to share with you guys, one of the first times I did that was in Kinshasa, in DRC. And the government wanted to focus on women's rights and wanted Secretary Kerry to tour a hospital there. So I get sent out a week in advance to try and figure out how best to do this and how best to tell the story, how best to engage the media, how best to use social media for people back home to engage with that. And it was pretty overwhelming at first. I remember taking a lot I've learned from this project and thinking about as we're going to site visits and seeing these hospitals and talking to these women, how to tell the story for people back home and how can they engage so far away with what's happening here. So we ended up settling on a fistula repair hospital, which I also had to go back and tell my bosses about how to do this and how to relay the information that I'd seen there into a visit for him, telling it on social media, and engaging our reporters. So I think we use the same thing. I use the same topics that I've learned before about setting the tone, really, really listening to the people that I've met there, and just starting slow and trying to figure out little by little how to tell this, whether it's talking with a couple women and with doctors or with nurses, and then branching out and talking to families of the patients or friends that were visiting and asking them, you know, what do you think is the most important part for people to take away from this? Because being there so briefly, sometimes when you're either do something like I do or if you're a journalist, you can only be on the ground for a week, maybe. And that's the limited amount of time that you have. I was in South Africa for a month, and now when I travel for my job, it's about maybe 7 days on the ground. So you can have such a short amount of time to try and tell this story. And I'm sure all of you guys know you're trying to do as much as possible in that short amount of time. So I think going to the sites as much as possible, just being there. And I think I found by being there that people really appreciate your inputs. And they really appreciate that you're invested in what they have to say and that you want to get their story out. So I think now I've seen it from both sides, and I think there's things that are harder on both ways. And another part of what we do now is travel with the press corps and control access to sites, which we've heard about in my two presentations before. And I think just to underscore what was said, that access is, to me, one of the most important things when you're telling a story. And I think working from the State Department side, you're told no a lot as a reporter. You're told, no, you cannot go here. No, it is not safe. We think it is not safe to go here. But I think the most or the best stories that I've seen from our press corps are the people that didn't take no for an answer, or that are sitting outside our office saying like, well, I know you said no to this, but what about, I know you said no to X, but what about Y and Z? And I think that's when you push and you press, and you might feel like maybe you're annoying them or maybe you don't care, but that's when I think that we have seen the best stories come out. And I was talking with Mellissa before, we were in Afghanistan for the recent vote count and election. And we had a lot of reporters we were talking with that were both based in Afghanistan and members of our press corps who were previously based there that had come back. And they had really pushed. They wanted to go see vote counting sites, and they wanted to talk to people, and they wanted to talk to government officials and over the candidates. And I think we saw the best stories come out of people that just kept knocking on doors and didn't take no for an answer, or waited outside for people to get out and just were really there and didn't give up. And I think working for my project and with press now, those are the people that really shine. And those are the people that, from a government perspective or from the other side of journalism, that those are the people that you want to call. Because when you have a good story to tell or you have something that you want to get out and work with them on, you're always going to turn to the people that have worked the hardest. And then have, whether you didn't always see eye to eye on how to tell a story or where they could go, who they could talk to, or setting up interviews and that those that the people that tried the hardest are the ones that are always going to come back to you. So I hope I can talk to you guys about any of your questions from either side, and
Okay, so I have a question for all three of you, and I think that you guys can all come at it in different ways. Mellissa Fung, you talked about how you're kind of new to the freelance world, and Molly is an editor, and Mellissa Turley talked about how a story changes. So what I'm interested in is pitching and shaping a story. So like, how do you figure out what to pitch from the journalist side? What is a good pitch from the editor's side? What about that pitch might change as you go forward and report, and how do you accommodate that as a journalist, and what do you like to see as an editor?
I can start with that. What I've found is when photographers come to my office to pitch me a story, often they have not looked at my magazine at all, and that's really, really important because each magazine, website, newspaper, whatever, has kind of a particular commission or a particular way of approaching stories. And if you haven't read or looked at anything in Smithsonian magazine, if you want to pitch me a story on the effects of buying gold in Amazon, you're going to be kind of pissed off that you didn't know that you did that story 2 years ago. So I think that that's really important. Not only do you have to have solid research on the story that you are doing, but you need to solidly research the place that you are pitching and make sure that they haven't just published this.
I kind of went at this backwards. I was at the CBC for almost 20 years and then I just left. So I'm used to pitching to my bosses at the CBC where funds were very, very, very limited. Which got some stress in India that I wasn't getting that shot because we just don't have a lot of money. And I think that, it's the best way to pitch is to have access, right? As Molly said, it's really important to be able to say to your producer or your editor, I can get us something. I can get us something. If you let me do this story, I'm going to be the only person who will be able to show you what it's really like inside a women's shelter, or inside the home of an Afghan vet who is struggling with PTSD. Right? I'm the best person to tell the story. They have agreed to talk to me, only me, and it's and that's really the best way to sell a story. Sometimes they still say no, and then you find other ways to do the story. I just remember they said no to a lot of. When I came back from Afghanistan, a little background, I dealt with my own PTSD, and a lot of that was by talking to soldiers who had come back dealing with it. So they became my peer group, so to speak, and I had a lot of access to their struggles. And so I decided that I had a list of stories that I wanted to pitch and tell on the CBC, and because we didn't have enough money, they said, okay, you can do 2 of these stories, one on traumatic brain injury, and one on homeless veterans. And so what I ended up doing was telling a lot of the other stories, the struggles of the amputees through these other stories. So there are still ways you can kind of get around when your editor or your producer tells you no. There are still ways you can sort of sneak those stories in.
So as Melissa was just saying about sneaking stories in, we've seen it a lot of times that our reporters will come with us to a destination. Maybe they're coming with us to a European country or something, or we were in Ukraine a while ago when everything was happening. And they might be there to cover Kerry or Secretary Kerry while he's going around doing more bilateral talks. But then you see really great stories happening when they break off a little bit. We call it getting out of the bubble because you're trapped in such this. You're moving from motorcade to meeting and everything. You're in this tight group. Some of the coolest stories I've seen our guys do is when they break out and talk to people. And so you might be there for one reason, but if you can work in different ways to get out and get different coverage and talk to people that's not just government officials, which I think you see a lot of times, that those are really the most interesting.
We'll open up to questions from you guys. We've got about 20 minutes or so.
So this question's for Mellissa. It's regarding sort of documentary today, and sort of it's related to sort of the decline of more traditional food reporting. You see in newspapers. So a report like that is, like it comes to like some good reporting that on sort of the beat. I want to know how you found that report and where you got it from. And then also, as you mentioned, after you did the documentary, a lot of the reasons why this sort of government changed their policies was because of other news organizations looking at it. But there aren't news organizations looking more closely at these kind of issues. Is there a way to keep it on yourself? Are you sort of blogging about it? Are you tweeting about it? So how do you follow up with making a story like that?
That's a really good question. I found out about without letting there. I'm a TV reporter, actually. So how I found out about that report is that it was written by sort of a crazy woman. That's the best way I can describe her, right? She lives out in Victoria, BC. And this is her life's work, is to go after the asbestos industry in Quebec. And so she sends stuff out all the time, right? And, you know, most editors and your eyes glaze over because, you know, you see her name in your inbox. And she's like, right? But for some reason, I don't know what it was that I just clicked on that report, right? And that's how I found it out. And then when I made calls to experts that you saw in the story, you know, they already knew about it. They said, oh my God, finally, mainstream media is paying attention to this issue. They couldn't believe that they couldn't get the Canadian government or the Canadian media interested in it in the first place. So I think it was just serendipitous that, you know, I clicked on one email from this crazy woman. And I tend to open everything. So, you know, if Department of Foreign Affairs, which is equivalent to Melissa's department, in Canada, sends me something, I'll always read. I'll always read it. Like I open every single bit of mail. It's a long time sometimes, but I do, because you just never know what little nugget you can find in it. In terms of following up the story, people didn't. We kind of kept, so part of Canada's evil role in perpetuating this horrible industry was that every 2 years there's a thing called the Rotterdam Convention. And it's where countries go and agree on what to list as a dangerous chemical or a dangerous. So Canada, for years, has been blocking the addition of asbestos to the list at the Rotterdam Convention. So we used that as an opportunity to follow up. That once again, Canada is, you know, and so I think it was the first time we did that as a follow to this story that the Globe and Mail picked it up, and then other organizations followed. In terms of social media, I'm kind of old school, right? I have like only 300 Twitter posts. Everybody follow me. So I'm still kind of figuring out how to tweet, what to tweet. The boundaries between tweeting something personal and professional I find very disturbing. So I tend to not tweet and only retweet things that Melissa's boss tweets, or, you know, I don't, it's hard as a journalist to try to take if you tweet, am I taking a stand on this? I don't know. So I'm still figuring out how to deal with social media. I do post things that I've done. I'll tweet that. But for the most part, I'm going to hand it off to you, because I really, you know, I'm a bit old school when it comes to.
Well, mine's very different. I guess I feel the same way. Well, mine's different from you guys, but when you're tweeting something isn't endorsed, does that mean, or are you asking a question? And I think some of the coolest things I've seen in our reporters, I don't know what else to do, but they tweet everything. And I think it becomes on my mind, like, are you taking a stance? I think that as a reporter, you have a unique opportunity to draw people's attention to something that you don't have to share the rules that you retweet with strong attention to your followers. So I think I've gone back and forth. Sometimes you want to tweet about everything. But I think I think you know the purpose is something we talked about with journalists and at the time and just trying to come up with something that if you're drawing attention to it, if you're taking a stand, if you're really taking your own work, even if you're wrong with the best way, most times.
It was languishing with our red guys and not too many followers. And so, that's so give it to me. So now we have 16,000 followers. What I've done is just basically have photographers who I think are really interested in what's taking over. And you know, of course, there's not much human learning to do it. So I talk to them about whether it's something that they want to have system. And it's that to them. It's not stuff. So that's kind of possible.
Thank you. This question from Mark. As a photo editor, I'm wondering if you had any recommendations for review photography for pitching finished products beyond researching the outlet. How do you approach the editor with whom you
I think you'll find that most editors are really open to hearing from photographers, even if they don't have relationships they don't know about. You know, the best way to do it is just by email, because everybody is being open and see, you know. And you know, not necessarily all actually working with us. So, you know, if you have a project that you've actually already done, and it's really good, you know, that is something that, you know, is very cost effective for organizations. And obviously, for the publisher, you don't have to pay for the entire, you know, years of production or whatever. You know, so I would say that magazines, newspapers, websites are all very interested. So first, it's by email, and then follow up. Phone call, I basically read everything. I might not respond to it right away, but if you send me your portfolio or your project, I and usually try to say, very interesting project. I don't know if we can do it, but you know, how about social systems? You know, or interesting project, and we've got something going on the subject. You know, really, we're planning. We already have our issues. You know, we're working on December right now, so we're not a very, you know, reactive. But yeah, I think most photographers who I know are interested in seeing projects that are either you know, mixing shaping that are in progress or that are, you know, photographers completed and maybe don't, but we can shape.
This is for all of you that do this, what do you see as the strengths between standard series and something like this that you showed us? And it sort of it mirrors the vision slightly that maybe you can talk about. It's what do you prefer to see?
For Smithsonian, you know, it really depends. I'm not, we try to use photography really well, but we're not necessarily photographers. We are doing public story writing. But, you know, that being said, I've also had some success in projects are already in progress, and we're moving into a writing so, you know, one of our writers, Josh, was, you know, there's a lot of stories in Africa, there was a photography that works, who I spent a year in the night village
No, we don't want to open this site that everybody has. You know, it's the, surprise me because we feel like
We got 7 minutes.
So I guess going back and forth, I wouldn't really say that we're a couple years out, but I started as an intern at CBC and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, whether I was CBC, whether I was reporting, whether I was teaching, and I found this kind of thing in the middle. And I think just getting your foot in the door anywhere you can, whether there's an organization you want to work with or publication or however it is, I think just being there and being a part of whether, I mean, ideally you all want to get your stories and put it out there, but just being there and seeing how others work and having access to talk to people and having access to see how someone needs a job that you might want someday, just being near them and see what they do. I think is just important. So whether you're starting an intern or an associate or something, like what you do at the next level, it's kind of nice. But my fear is that, you know, I studied my first job was at the Washington Post as a teacher. So that ended up having and they all have the ups and downs. You know, the bottom line is you have to be passionate. And you want to have energy in all of this. I graduated high school 20 years ago, so it's condensed 20 years. And it's I kind of did it the old-fashioned way. As a teacher freelance, I interned at a major network in New York working for free. And then I went back to Canada as a local reporter in Vancouver, a local station, doing lots of weather stories, cat stories. And then eventually went to national news. But even then, you know, you still, as a national reporter, do a lot of weather stories. Afghanistan stories happen.
Probably take one more question from the audience.
I guess this question is mostly for Mellissa. I was wondering if you could speak on working on sensitive topics and working with populations that have been disadvantaged in some way, for example, the discussions with people in India. How do you approach telling your story without being able to make a promise that when you receive justice or that your story will have an impact in the future and you don't really know and I mean, that's a really good question because you can't make any promises. And I think you have to be honest from the beginning with them. You know, all you can do is show that you know, I always think that being a journalist is such a privilege because people invite you into their homes. And sometimes you have to knock a few times, but they invite you in and they are willing to share their story with you. And it's a privilege. And I always try to remember that because that means I treat everybody with respect. I can never make promises. I can't. In terms of, all the PTSD stories I did after, so you do one story with a soldier who's having problems claiming with Veterans Affairs, right, with their disability claim or whatever it is. And you get emails and phone calls from all their buddies. So what I would do is, even if I wasn't doing a story on them, or focusing my next story on them, I would just make a call to Veterans Affairs in Ottawa and say, "Hi, it's Mellissa Fung from CBC calling calling about Captain so and so, calling about First Officer so and so," and that was enough in some cases to move Veterans Affairs to at least call them back, right? And I did that a lot, but you can't ever make promises to you that it's gonna make a difference. All you can tell them is that you will tell their story the best way you possibly can, and respect what they're putting themselves to tell their story.
Since I think veterans of the bomb, another question, obviously that's a sensitive topic, but I think, if we go, whatever you do, if you go with respect, if you go with the idea that you are, telling a story that, really wants to be told, and wants this person didn't, isn't, that people want to know. So one question about the safety of journalism. It's a really fine line I found between putting yourself in a situation that's dangerous for a story that no one else can get, or deciding if it's too dangerous. So if you could talk a little bit about how you just have to be okay with that, and
I think a healthy dose of fear is never a bad thing, but you also can't always be thinking about it, right? Because it will paralyze you. I, like many journalists, have been on the front lines with soldiers in Afghanistan, and a couple of times when we were caught getting that or convoy breakdown. And we were not allowed to report this because it would have been bad. Our convoy broke down in Thailand, and the shots started coming. You can't, in that moment, you don't even feel fear. Like, first of all, you can't get anyone, right? You don't want to be a liability to the company. And getting the story isn't as important in that case, in a case like that, as staying safe and making sure that you do what the commander tells you to do. I ended up an hour behind one of our tanks. So a healthy dose of fear is never a bad thing because it makes you aware of your surroundings. It makes you know that there's a car that is driving. You'll note it, right? Blue car drove by twice, right? And then you get out, right? As soon as you start maybe feeling like you're being watched or you're in a bad situation, it could be, it doesn't have to be in Kabul. It could be, in the Bronx or wherever, right? Just being aware of your surroundings and knowing that maybe you're somewhere where you sketchy for you to be, but don't let it paralyze you, because you can't. Otherwise, you don't even bother going. If you think you're paralyzed and thinking about things, it's not going to be helpful to you or your crew or the people.
As an editor, talking to someone about research, what research is happening, No, obviously, it's, you know, it's on our radar, it's on our interests. So, you know, talk to some other folks about what's in charge of the next one. But, you know, magazines, there's so many more freelancers now, magazines should be, you know, about insurance, you know, like, the CBC, so it doesn't cost that much. Student insurance, magazines should be willing to invest. But like Lisa said, you know, it's works, you know, it's like paying attention and just really kind of knowing don't get yourself in situations.
I'm gonna add to that because I'm covering the team. And as a freelancer, you know, I am still treating myself like an employee at CBC in terms of insurance, in terms of, and the insurance is not just, it's crazy insurance, right? It's kidnapping rental insurance. It is emergency medical evacuation insurance. It's not your normal travel insurance. Your normal insurance, no, it's not going to cover you, right? So if you want to go anywhere that's remotely, where you have like the remote possibility of something happening to you, you know, even if you're freelance, you can find funds to pay for this stuff because it's not worth your family having to deal with it if something comes up. I was lucky that the CBC paid for my insurance when it happened. Otherwise, you know, we would still be paying for it. So as young journalists, freelancers, I would strongly advise you to find the money to cover yourself. And sometimes it means working with a security company in a place like Iraq, or Afghanistan, or in the Middle East. It's money well spent. It's peace of mind for your family.
The only thing to add to that is for my project, I arrived in Joburg by myself, and after a couple of days, just realized it wasn't safe. I couldn't get the stories I wanted, I couldn't get around, I didn't feel comfortable. And so that was really a judgment call. And I think if you have a position of or something you have in the future, it's just deciding this isn't going to work. And so then my next one was to go to Cape Town, and then in Cape Town I realized this had to be trusted, whether it was riding out with someone that I met the day before, but that I felt safe with. And it was purely judgment. I could have been wrong, but I was right. And it's just trusting your instincts and making sure that you do have a plan. I mean, at one point I realized, okay, I'm about 6 hours away. We drove here. How would I get out? And I just think, always thinking in the back of my mind, like, okay, what's my life strategy? What things to do about
It sounds like this has been a very interesting conversation. I'm going to cut it off now because we have to wrap this panel and move on to the next one. But these guys will be around. Liz and Melissa, thank you so much for sharing.